Afternoon and welcome to the Chencho's virtual seminar series on mental flourishing, scientific and practical views on emotions and mind training. This series is organized by the Center for Bhutan and Jainish Studies in collaboration with the International Society for Bhutan Studies. Alongside its health risk, the COVID-19 pandemic has created a new context from which to view our minds. There are so many uncertainties, it is hard to plan. Relationship challenges have changed, and at the same time, there may be more awareness of and support for mental health, for positive psychological and spiritual practices. This seminar series will engage with various actors and experts to encourage interdisciplinary dialogue on training one's mind and emotions. We will hear from leaders in the fields who are using cutting-edge scientific techniques to understand emotions and mind training. Speakers will also share practical routes to mental flourishing and policies that can support these. Today is our opening seminar in this new series and takes the new format of an interview addressing on the topic Unwinding Anxiety. I'm delighted to introduce our moderator for today's session, Dr. Chencho Dorji. Dr. Chencho is a senior consultant psychiatrist at the Jimmy Dojiwanshu National Referral Hospital. He is the first Bhutanese to become a qualified psychiatrist and a recipient of the Hubert Humphrey Fellowship Award for his excellent service. A professor of psychiatry at the Gesagepo University of Medical Sciences of Bhutan, Dr. Chencho has published prolifically on mental health and related topics. Dr. Chencho must promptly leave at 5 p.m. So, if need be, Tashukarma Ura, the president for Center for Bhutan and Jain Studies, will take over the moderation of this session. It is with great pleasure for the CBS team and our esteemed audience to welcome Dr. Chencho and our keynote speaker, Dr. Judson Brewer. Now over to you, Dr. Chencho.
Thank you so much, Pemdem, for this warm introduction. Good afternoon to the distinguished participants and audience, and good morning to Dr. Judson Brewer. This seminar series, exploration of different approaches and methods to achieving mental flourishing, is critical at a time when the globalist world is constantly overwhelming us with information and content available to us at the touch of a button on our smartphones, laptops, etc. Taking the time to assess our mental state is more necessary than ever. Although stigma and conversation on mental health and well-being is slowly being normalized in Bhutan, I'm confident that seminars such as this will greatly expand our understanding of these issues. Let me introduce our speaker, and then we will commence the interview. Dr. Judson Brewer is an internationally known thought leader in the field of habit change and the science of self-mastery, having combined over 20 years of experience with mindfulness training with his scientific research therein. He is the Director of Research and Innovation at Brown University's Mindfulness Center and Associate Professor of Psychiatry at the same university. Dr. Brewer has developed novel mindfulness programs for behavior change, including both in-person and app-based treatment for smoking, emotional eating, and anxiety. His current research interests include intersection between mindfulness, emotion regulation, and behavior change. Additionally, his work bridges basic and clinical sciences through translational research that includes design, testing, and implementation of digital therapeutics in real-world settings. His work has been featured on 60 Minutes at TED.com, fourth most viewed talk of 2016, with over 10 million views. Quite a remarkable achievement indeed. And in documentaries, books, news outlets across the world. He is the author of The Craving Mind, From Cigarettes to Smartphones to Love, Why We Get Hooked and How We Can Break Bad Habits. Thus, I'm delighted to welcome you, Professor Brewer.
Thank you for having me.
So, turning to my first question, Professor, I understand that your latest book is entitled Unwinding Anxiety, What an apt topic for this global phase, given the pandemic and all the anxieties that buffet us all. Can I ask you first to give us an overview of this work, a gist of the book, please?
Yes. I wrote the book somewhat based on my own anxiety, which was that I was struggling with helping my patients in my clinic with their anxiety. I had been trained to prescribe medications, and with medications, there's a term that's called number needed to treat, which means how many patients you need to treat before one person shows significant benefit. That number for medications is 5.2, which means that I have to treat over 5 patients before one patient shows a significant benefit. That's not a really good number in terms of helping my patients, because I didn't know which one of 5 patients was going to benefit and then how I was going to help the other 80%. I had been studying an app for eating, and in that research, somebody had said to me that her anxiety was triggering her stress eating and asked me to develop a program for anxiety. I didn't really think about looking at anxiety, but that prompted me to look back at some research from the 1980s that suggested that anxiety could actually be driven in the same way as other habits. And with that, seeing that, it occurred to me that we could actually approach anxiety from the same perspective as other habit change. And my lab, we'd been able to develop good programs for smoking and for eating. So we developed a program for anxiety and then started testing it and did a number of studies. Just as an example, we did a study with people with generalized anxiety disorder and found that we got a 67% reduction in clinically validated anxiety scores. And that number needed to treat. So for medications, the number needed to treat is over 5. The number needed to treat in that study was 1.6, meaning many fewer people needed to do the treatment before we saw a significant benefit. So with all of that, I started looking to see what was happening and found that there was actually a 3-step process that people were following. And that became the basis of writing this book so that anybody could follow this process for themselves and hopefully work with their anxiety or any other habit. The process works not just for anxiety as a habit, but for other habits. So the first step in the book, the first part of the book, is about helping people map out how their minds work. If they can't map that out related to anxiety or other habits, they can't work with their minds. The second step is helping people tap into the natural reward systems in their brains, because this is what sets up habits and is actually also what helps people change habits, including anxiety. And then the third step is helping people find what I call the bigger, better offer, meaning if our brains look for things that are rewarding, can we find rewards that are wholesome, that we can help people develop in their own minds? And here, there are 2 main categories of those bigger, better offers. One is curiosity, and another is kindness. So that's really the basis of this book, is helping people understand their minds, helping them tap into their natural reward systems in their brain, and then also helping them find ways to flourish in ways that they already have, inherent capacities, but just may not be using them.
Yes, Professor Brewer, very exhaustive work there. I also heard that you had developed an app for this doing with anxiety, but in the context of Bhutan, perhaps our people may not be able to access it because of lack of credit cards. But may I request you, if you can give us a small demonstration of what we might be able to find in the app, or take us through a very small practice, how we sort of prepare ourselves to deal with anxiety.
I would be happy to. So I'll just walk everybody through a demonstration of the 3 steps. So the first step is mapping out a habit loop. And so I'll use the example of anxiety, but this can be used with any habit. So there are 3 elements to a habit: a trigger, a behavior, and a result. And so what I have folks do, and we actually have a PDF that people can download. The website is mapmyhabit.com. But basically, anybody can write down on a piece of paper trigger, behavior, result, with arrows pointing to each of them and back to the trigger. And they can start with the behavior. So what's the behavior around anxiety? So anxiety itself, the feeling of anxiety can be a trigger. So it can be as simple as feeling nervous or feeling uneasy or feeling stressed. That can be the trigger. The behavior can be anything from worrying as a mental behavior to procrastination, where somebody goes and does something else instead of a task that they're supposed to do. And so they can write in, figure out what the behavior is, what their typical behavior is. With anxiety, the typical behavior is worrying. And then the results, they can ask themselves, what am I getting from this? What's the result of worrying? Typically, psychologically, worry makes us feel like we're more in control, perhaps, than we actually are, because we're doing something as compared to not doing something about the anxiety. So for example, I have patients that wake up in the morning and they feel anxious. So there's their trigger. They start worrying. Oh, why am I anxious? There's the behavior. And then the result actually is that they feel more anxious because the worrying doesn't help them figure out why they're anxious. It's just a feeling of anxiety. And that worrying feeds back and makes their anxiety worse. So that's the first step, is being able to map out the process. I'll give one more example and then I'll pause and see if that makes sense. Stress eating. So if somebody's anxious, there's the trigger. The behavior could be that they eat when they're not hungry. There's the behavior. And then the result is that they distract themselves from the anxiety. So for a moment, they might feel a little bit better because they're not focused on their anxiety. I'll pause there before I go on to the next step. Does that make sense?
Yes, definitely. I mean, some anxiety or worry or tension, triggers something in your brain, and the brain sends messages to your body, and the body, responds in fight or flight response, such as, heavy breathing or difficulty breathing, or, increased heartbeats or loud heartbeats, muscle tension. And a lot of people do not really understand that such a symptom can be triggered by some anxiety or worry in your mind. But then people seem to believe that something is wrong with their heart or something is wrong with their chest. Mm-hmm. And that sets up another round of anxiety or worry. So in a way, it becomes a bit of a vicious cycle. And I think somewhere we need to break that cycle. And I think that's exactly what you were saying, the 3-step method of how to recognize your stress or anxiety, how to respond to them appropriately. So that's, we hope that we'll be able to read your book someday. We have not been able to, I have not been able to at least do it right now, but we hope that it becomes available online. I will just go to the next topic because, Professor, you are also very famous in the world. You have a reputation of studying meditators' brains for a while now, it seems, and trying to understand scientifically what is occurring there. And as you know, in Bhutan, we have many, many highly accomplished meditators. So could you give us 2 or 3 examples of the findings about the science of serious meditation that our practitioners could appreciate?
I'd be happy to. We've been studying this for over a decade now, and what we have found is that there's a network of brain regions, which is called the default mode network. And this network gets activated when people are caught up in anxiety. It gets activated when people are caught up in a craving, whether it's for chocolate or for cigarettes or for cocaine. And it even gets activated when people get a bunch of likes on Instagram. So if they post a picture on Instagram and they get a bunch of likes, the thumbs up, this activates the default mode network. So the default mode network seems to be active, very active. It's called the default mode network because it seems to be what we default to when we aren't doing anything in untrained, in the normal population. And we default to it because we're thinking about ourselves. We're thinking about things we've done in the past. We're thinking about what we need to do in the future. We're thinking about ourselves. What we found, our first study with experienced meditators, was that this default mode network quiets down in experienced meditators. So where the normal person, this network is probably getting activated about half of waking life. It's active pretty often. It gets really quiet in experienced meditators when they're meditating. Now, that was our first finding, suggesting that they're not activating this network. We then started to do some studies where we could give people feedback from their own brains in real time as they were meditating. So we could link up their subjective experience with their brain activity. So we could see, well, what does that deactivation actually mean? And what we found was that when people are activating the network, it's not just having a craving or having an anxious thought, it's getting caught up in it. So that feeling of contraction, that feeling of closed downness, some describe it as identification. When we're identified with a thought or emotion, this network gets activated. So it's how this emotion is affecting me. And what we also found was that when people are curious, or when they let go, when they're just observing and being curious about their thoughts, when they're curious about their emotions, when they're curious about their body sensations, that opens up, where they're less contracted, they're less closed down, they're more open. And that corresponds to a decreased activation in the default mode network. So here, it's not just having a craving, it's not just having an anxious thought, it's about getting caught up in that, taking it personally. So that was the second big finding that we had. And then we've been able to now extend that to showing that people who've never meditated before, we can give them an app-based mindfulness training. So for example, we did a study with people that wanted to quit smoking. And we brought them into our lab and scanned their brains before they started their trying to quit smoking. And we measured how active their default mode network was. And then we could randomize them to get mindfulness training or a different training. And a month later, we could scan their brains again to see how they did and if their brains changed. And what we found was that the more people deactivated their default mode network, the more that predicted a reduction in the number of cigarettes they were smoking. So the less active their default mode network, the less they smoked. And this was we were showing them smoking cues when they were in the scanner. So I forgot to mention that they were, we'd bring them in the scanner, we'd show them pictures of cigarettes or people smoking cigarettes. And they, over the course of the month, they could learn to pay attention and notice the thoughts, notice the cravings, and not get caught up in them. Yet this was very specific. This result only happened in the group that got mindfulness training. In the control group, there was no correlation between a reduction in default mode network activity and a reduction in cigarette smoking. And so just to bring all of this together, experienced meditators seem to be very good at deactivating or not activating their default mode network. And what that suggests is that they can notice thoughts, they can notice emotions, they can notice body sensations and not be identified with them, not be caught up in them. And what we find is we can train people to do that. And that training helps them change habits, such as helping them stop smoking.
Fascinating story there. Yes, I also read and heard about experienced meditators being able to sustain their focus or concentration over long periods of time. And that is perhaps also one reason where mindfulness plays a very important part in not being caught up in those habitual modes of thinking and behavior. That's what I think you are saying, that they can detach themselves from those habitual tendencies and what we now call as neuroplasticity, I suppose, that you can reorganize, realign your neural connections in the brain. And so that's another fascinating work there. But coming here closer to Bhutan, I thought I should ask some advices from you. As you know, Bhutan aims to expand gross national happiness, or what you call as GNH. And our host institution, CBS, is charged with measuring gross national happiness. But between 2010 and 2015, while Bhutan's gross national happiness index grew significantly, there were also significant decreases in positive and negative emotions, such as spirituality, including meditation, and life satisfaction. So in the wake of the COVID pandemic, mental health is also under stress. I wonder if you have seen imaginative ways that public policy can improve psychological well-being and mental health, which I believe is paramount part of our GNH drive. If you have some advices for us.
So here I would say one of the most important things is helping people understand how their minds work, helping people know their minds. So education in this sense is power. So from a public policy standpoint, I would say the more we can train people to just start to recognize how their minds work and recognize their mental processes, the more that can contribute to the gross national happiness. So for example, with the COVID pandemic, we saw across the world a huge increase in anxiety. And we know why that, partly why that happens. It's related to our brains not liking uncertainty. So it's similar to when we don't have enough calories, when we are hungry, our stomach starts gurgling and rumbling and telling us to go get some food. When we don't have information, when there's uncertainty, our brain rumbles just like our stomach, and it says, go get some information, because information is food for our brain. It helps us survive. So simply helping people understand this, that there is uncertainty, and that uncertainty drives us to get information, that in itself can help people start to become less anxious. And the reason for that is because if there is something uncertain and we just start worrying about all of, oh, maybe this could happen, maybe this could happen, maybe this could happen, that's when we start to become anxious. But if we can educate people and say, it's okay, we don't know the answer right now, we are looking for the answer. So for example, with COVID, there are a lot of unknowns. Reminding people that it's okay not to know the answer, that people are looking for the answer, for example, vaccines and things like that, and that we will get the answers, that helps put people's minds at ease. So from a national policy or a policy perspective, helping the people that are disseminating information to remind people that it's okay not to know right now. That way it helps all of us stay in what I think of, and it's been described as our growth zone. So when there's uncertainty, we either move into our panic zone because our brains say, oh no, this is terrible because I don't know. Or we can move into our growth zone and say, instead of, oh no, we can say, oh, where we can bring some curiosity and say, well, oh, this is different. Oh, can I be with myself? Can I be with my emotions? Can I notice my thoughts? And can I learn to be with uncertainty? Because the only certain thing in life is that there is going to be more uncertainty. And so if we can learn to be okay with uncertainty, and if we can train people to be okay with uncertainty, this will help them not only be happier because they're less anxious, but it will also help them start to be in this growth zone where they can learn and they can actually find answers rather than have their brains shut down.
Yes, COVID and the pandemic, so unpredictable and of course unprecedented. We had set up hotline in Bhutan. We have around 5 hotlines at the national level and many hotlines at the community levels. And one of the obvious queries were about how do I respond to this situation? And we were saying, you will be stressed, you will be feeling apprehensive, will be worried, and that is a normal reaction to an abnormal situation, which is the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
None of us anywhere in the world has had this experience, and of course, we will respond in a way that is protective of ourselves. And so we are saying, if you're feeling a bit uptight, you're not able to sleep a little bit, feeling a bit restless, this is how we respond to an abnormal situation, and your response is normal. Of course, there are many other people who get a little more affected than others, who requires more help as well. So yes, as a nation, I think Bhutan, we have done very well. Our leadership has been very meticulous in taking care of everything meticulously, everything. That so far we are so fortunate that we don't have a big catastrophe or a big anxiety in the population as such. So we are happy with that. But we need to be prepared. We need to stay informed. Now I'll come to the last question, and perhaps we'll have to give some time for the audience to ask some questions as well. So this is my last question. Bhutan, as you may be knowing, is constitutionally a Buddhist kingdom, and we have strong and diverse traditions of prayer and meditation, monasteries and convents and lay people. I would like to close with a very open-ended and quick, curious question. How do you see Bhutan from where you sit? Because of this spiritual heritage, what might we have to offer? Or what might we learn from your own research?
I really like this question. So I don't know what my research would help you all with, because I think of research helping us develop concepts in the service of wisdom. So a concept can help us have the an understanding or even a faith to try something out, where we see some science and we say, oh, that science looks good, I should try this out. But Bhutan is starting from the position of wisdom, where people are doing the practices themselves. And so with the practice, I would say what Bhutan has to offer is that you're starting with there's a term in the West called walking the walk, as in not just talking about doing something, but actually doing it. And so here I would say all the folks in Bhutan who are leading the way by actually walking the walk, by actually meditating. This is a demonstration to others in Bhutan and also to the world that, prayer and meditation in a very strong spiritual tradition can boost happiness, and that happiness is really important. I think from my perspective, one of the things that we hear a lot about Bhutan is, oh, they have this gross national happiness index where they're focusing on happiness, whereas a lot of the rest of the world is focusing on growth, on making more things, of getting more things. But that's not making them happy. And it's also, frankly, it's destroying the planet along the way. And so here I would say Bhutan is a beacon of hope, where if we focus our priorities on happiness rather than getting things, in the thinking that the pursuit of happiness, which doesn't actually make us happy. You may be familiar with the Buddhists, the idea of the hungry ghost, where it's this ghost with a very narrow, thin neck and esophagus and a very large belly, where no matter how much it eats, it's never satisfied. It's always hungry. Well, that's the way the world is going right now, is the hungry ghost. We're trying to eat as much as we can and we're never satisfied. Whereas when people meditate and have a strong spiritual tradition, they can find that happiness, they can find the contentment without being driven to get more things. And so I would say Bhutan is a model for not only helping us find happiness, but also helping us save the planet.
Fantastic, Professor Brewer. In Bhutan, although our elder generation are quite steeped into spiritual practices and also meditation, the young generation are more skeptical, or some of them even cynical about all these practices. So we need people like you, who has done extensive researches in the laboratory, to prove to this young generation that the contemplative practices, the spiritual practices, does have a role in this modern world. And I think evidence-based practices, I think, speaks for themselves. So we have so much gratitude for people like you who work day in, day out to churn knowledge and knowledge into wisdom, and hopefully we can deliver it to our younger generation. Professor Brewer, now thank you very much so far. I hope you all enjoyed this substantive and informative exchange. Now, if participants in the Zoom meeting have a short, sharp question, please kindly raise your electronic hand or put your question into the Q&A chat. We'll now open the floor for questions. And I have already seen a couple, I suppose. So I'll ask my friend Judson, if there are no hands up, I will just ask my colleague Judson to show me some of the questions from the chat. Is that all right? Do you know who's speaking? All right. Anyway, I don't know who's speaking, who's asked the question, but let me just read the question now. Daniel Brown might criticize how mindfulness is taught in the West because people are focused only on beginning stages and lose sight of the final goal, or what he calls full enlightenment. with the 80 plus positive states. What is your view about how to make your meditation widely popular without compromising quality?
Mhm. It's a good question, and I'm actually good friends with Daniel Brown. We've done research together, and so thank you for the question. Here, I would say, if if somebody hasn't had a taste of full enlightenment, it might be challenging for them to be motivated to keep moving in that direction. So, um, the image of a map comes up, and if somebody's looking at a map and they're looking in front of them, at the territory of the map, and they look at the very end of the map, but they don't see that part, in front of them on the map. They have to start where they are. And so what I would say here is, if we can help people see the benefits and the rewards that come from the beginning stages, those rewards, this taps into the reward-based learning system in the brain, where it says, oh, that feels good, I want to do that again. And so as they keep gaining those rewards, they will keep moving forward, and they'll follow the map, and they'll be following the map with the territory that's right in front of them, because that's what they have access to. And so here, if somebody just thinks of the end goal and they don't know what it's like, or they're not sure that it's attainable, they might get discouraged. But if they look right in front of them and they have that own experience themselves, they notice what it feels like to be kind, or they notice what it feels like to be curious, and their brain registers that as more rewarding than excitement or other things that they get distracted by, or things that are causing them suffering, they're going to be constantly moving forward. And here, if people are aware of those things, they're more rewarding than any of these material things. And so it will be a path that will continue to lead them forward. There's even a term in Theravada Buddhism called stream entry. Once people really have a solid taste of selflessness, for example, the teaching is that they can't go back, that they will, I think within 7 lifetimes, they will achieve full enlightenment. So here, I think we can focus on the beginning stages, because that's going to get the most people interested and the most people practicing. And that also, if we teach it in ways that help people identify the clear rewards, those rewards are going to keep people coming back and keep people practicing and having people want to keep going. So that would be one way to explore that.
Yes, I agree. I think there is a difference in the approach from the Western and from the Oriental, the Asian approach. We in Bhutan, for example, believe that meditation is for people who are already accomplished Buddhist scholars or practitioners, whereas the Western world has started with meditation as the entry point, and then slowly get into the philosophical point of this. But my own take is, with all this buffeting us in this modern world, if we can utilize those tenets and philosophies and the practice of Buddhism to benefit people while we are living in this present world, I think that's something we need to, use it, master it, and of course, by doing that, if you can also get closer to enlightenment, that's all the more better. Moving on.
So can I just say something to that?
Yes.
I totally agree. I think we all can become scholars of our own minds, and we don't need to have all of the scholarly background to begin to see how our minds work. The Buddha wasn't a scholar. He just sat down and looked at his own experience. And through his own observation, he was contemplating what many are familiar with, what was called dependent origination, on the night of his enlightenment. And we've actually written papers suggesting that what he was contemplating was this process of operant conditioning, of habit formation. And so I think anyone can contemplate their own minds. You know, what's the trigger? What's the behavior? What's the result? And anyone can notice the difference between when they're caught up in wanting something versus when they're being generous, for example. You know, that's often described as the first of the graduated teachings of the Buddha is generosity. Anyone can do that. I don't think it's, somebody has to wait to be a scholar. And in that way, the more people in the world that practice generosity and kindness, the more the world will benefit. And, certainly the scholars can go do, that as well. But I think we all can become scholars of our own mind. So I just wanted to highlight what you were saying.
Certainly, compassion, generosity, kindness, all these are recipes for happiness, actually, individual happiness. I'm moving on. We also got some questions coming from Facebook, which is going live. But before that, I'll also go to a comment from Sange Dorji, Paro Education College. What do you think about the individuals who doesn't even have the slightest of insight to break the cycle of chain of thought? It seems that most of the individuals who are dominated by the problem, habit, cognition, emotion, social, etc., doesn't even have the glimpse of the awareness. I guess it's more of a comment rather than a question, but I might just go on and you might like to answer this together. So there's Sangeet Chencho from Facebook Live. Is there any other specific methods and techniques other than mindful training to quiet the anxiety, smoking, and drinking, etc., with holistic approach?
One of the approaches that I've seen in the West, and there may be other equivalents that I'm not aware of, that is very much helps people see and tap into this reward system in their brain, is called motivational interviewing. And this motivational interviewing is a practice that's taught to therapists that can use with their clients. But it's very basic in the sense, it's very simple in the sense that it asks people. So if I have a patient in my clinic who wants to quit smoking, and they come in and they say, help me quit smoking, I don't tell them to quit. If I use motivational interviewing, I don't tell them to quit smoking, because willpower is generally pretty weak. What I do is I say, well, why don't you smoke more? That's the basic idea around motivational interviewing. That question prompts somebody to look at their own experience, to see what it is about smoking that doesn't feel good to them. So for a lot of people, it's expensive to smoke cigarettes. They know it's bad for their health. It makes their breath smell bad. It tastes bad. And so when I ask them, why don't you smoke more? It prompts them to look at their own experience. So it brings awareness in and helps them see how unrewarding the behavior is. And that is the only way to change a habit, is to update the reward value in our brain. And the only way to update that reward value is to bring awareness in and link up cause and effect. This goes back to the Buddhist teachings. So you can see motivational interviewing being a great way to help people change their brains by bringing cause and effect together. I smoke a cigarette and it tastes bad, or I smoke a cigarette and it's expensive, or I smoke a cigarette and I cough. So I would say there are any practice or any technique that can help people tap into their reward system in their brain that will help them change a bad habit.
I believe Pema Dorji is raising his hands. Pema, can you unmute? Can you unmute and ask the question,
Yeah.
please?
First of all, good afternoon, everyone. And I'd like to thank CVS and, of course, the moderator and the speaker out here. So I'm attending all the way from Rangsit University from Thailand. And it's quite interesting to sit and listen to your very interesting topic. My question would be very stupid, but I'd like to ask the speaker out here. My question is, can you share us some of the personal benefits of mind training? Because I believe that you are a practitioner. So I'd like to hear some of the benefits. I'm sure that there are many benefits, but can you share me the very striking benefits out of mind training? Thank you.
Mhm. I would be happy to, and thank you for the question. I won't spend a lot of time because I could speak for hours on the benefits that I've had personally. And I'll start with the summary, which is the mind training has been the biggest gift that I've ever received in my life. And I can't imagine anything else that's more important for me personally. So I started meditating when I was stressed out. I didn't know how my own mind worked. So one of the benefits that I started to receive immediately was starting to see how my own mind worked. And so that was like moving from being in a dark room where I was, reaching around, trying to find the walls, trying not to trip on things. That was my life. To turning on the light switch and seeing, oh, this is a room. There are objects here. So that was one benefit. Another was that it helped me be able to bring practices in right in the moment when I was stressed out to help me calm down. Another benefit was that I started getting panic attacks during residency, and I was using a Burmese practice called noting practice at the time. And that noting practice helped me be able to ride out full-blown panic attacks very quickly and not develop panic disorder. So there was a very pragmatic benefit there as well. Another benefit was when I was, it took me a few years, but when I was doing loving kindness practice, I started to realize just how amazing kindness is and how painful it is to be mean to people. And so another wonderful gift was that it has really helped me become disenchanted with judging people, with being angry with people, including being angry with myself. Not to say that anger doesn't arise, but I am much less prone to want to keep, purposefully be angry at people. It's also helped me see just the extent of the suffering that we all share in the world. And so it's helped me feel more connected with everyone that I meet, no matter who they are, and even people that I don't meet, because there's just some connection that I've been able to tap into that I can feel when I pay attention to it, to everyone in the world. So those are just some of the benefits. I could go on and on and on, but we'll save it for some other questions as well. Does that at least give you a taste for some of the benefits I've received?
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was so insightful for me, especially. So thank you, everyone.
Yes, to sum it and simplify it, to make it even simplistic, we have a habit of telling our friends, families, control your mind. Sim danzibe, control your mind, control your mind. Now it's very easy to say that, but for the receiver, what does he know? How to control the mind? That is the problem. So I believe mindfulness is one practice that at least teaches you how to control your mind, how to anchor your mind in the present moment. Because our mind is habitually being hijacked left and right, yesterday, tomorrow, here, there. So mindfulness brings home your mind with you. And I think if you can practice that, and I always tell that it needs a practice. It's not like automatically you can do that. It needs hours of practice. Just as you learn how to swim or drive a car or ride a bicycle, you need hours and days and months of practice to get into that mode where you have acquired that skill. And I think mindfulness practice also demands that much many hours So that once you really get into the practice and you know where it is, then you can find it. But just being mindful for 1 minute, that's what we are doing in schools at the moment. I think it's not enough. We must try to practice as much as we can. We are actually coming
can I
close
just add
to our
something?
session, but sure, please. Sure,
Here,
Dr. Brewer.
I agree that the more we practice, the more we develop the habit of mindfulness. I learned something simple but really powerful from a Tibetan meditation teacher, which was this phrase, short moments many times. And that lines up very nicely with how we form any habit. The more we do something, the more we're likely to do it. And so one way, if we don't have time to practice for hours at a time, what we can do is we can break those hours up into moments. And throughout our day, we can start practicing being aware in this moment. We can start practicing a moment of kindness. We can start practicing a moment of generosity. And we can take those moments to notice what it feels like when we're kind, when we're generous. And there we can develop these habits of being more aware. We can develop these habits of being kinder. We can develop these habits of being more generous through moment to moment experience if we don't have time to sit down and meditate more. What that also helps with is it helps us see those benefits so that we're more likely to find the time to practice more, which can then build on itself. So I just wanted to add that piece as well. I absolutely agree.
Well, somebody sent me a private question. Leki Dorji. Question to Dr. Judson. I have read recently somewhere, people who are active in social media, such as Facebook, Instagram, and so on, are a sign of loneliness, depression, and other mental stress. Do you have any comments on that, Dr. Brewer?
Yes, it's a good question. There have been a number of studies showing that there's a correlation between the amount of time spent on social media and depression, for example. And one reason for that, or at least one explanation, is that there's the ability to do a lot of social comparison on social media. So these phrases, FOMO, fear of missing out. So somebody goes on social media and they see all their friends doing something that they weren't invited to, and which can make them feel sad. Or they look to see how their friends are doing fun things, which can make them feel sad if they're not doing them. Or they see other people looking wonderful, and so they compare themselves to other people. So there's a lot of, with social media, there's the ability for social comparison, as well as feeling excluded just because, just by observing what people are posting on social media. And so it's pretty clear that when we compare ourselves to others, whether we, and this even goes back to some of the Buddhist teachings, there's this, the comparison, same as, better than, same as, worse than, all of these cause suffering. So social media provides this platform for us to do a lot of comparison. And no matter what the comparison is, it makes us suffer. And so I think that's one of the pieces that's contributing here.
Yes, I just learned recently that there's a word called virtual autism. Virtual autism. People who spend a lot of time on the social media virtually, they become autistic. Because autism is nothing but not socializing, not communicating with human beings in a manner that we are used to, and doing the thing repeatedly on and on, very restrictive in what you do. And yeah, I believe that one of the issues, especially with the young generation, with the young kids now, is they spend too much time on the social media, on the digital gadgets, and they are losing on the social front, on the communication skills that they need to have as human beings, as social animals. With this, because I have to move around 5 o'clock, I want to just do my job of thanking Dr. Brewer, proposing the vote of thanks. And after that, if Dr. Brewer have some time, please continue with our ask Tashu Karma Ura to take over this moderating job. I have to go at 5 o'clock. So we're extremely grateful to you, Dr. Brewer, for taking time to share your insightful and wonderfully informative presentation with us today. I will now offer a vote of thanks so that I can basically relieve myself from this. Dr. Brewer, your talk has definitely helped us strengthen and expand our understanding of mental well-being and provide us with some very practical tips and approaches to dealing with our own anxiety. We have been illuminated and equally impressed by the scientific reasoning to understanding mental well-being and the practice of mindfulness. Your talk has greatly contributed not only to a greater understanding of anxiety, but has also equipped each and every member of the audience with better skills to dealing with their own mental struggles. At the same time, we leave this seminar with greater enthusiasm and fresh ideas for charting our own paths in this area. We are grateful for your time, for this human and professional connection to you, for your interchange on the question and answer sessions, and for the wonderful way in which you have continued the momentum of our high levels seminar series on mental flourishing, scientific and practical views on emotions and mind training. I know, Dr. Brewer, I have seen some of your YouTubes and other podcasts. There's so much that we have to learn from you. I'm sure you will definitely come again. We would like to get you on the show again some other time. But for now, may I remind the audience that this seminar will continue over the next 6 weeks, thanks to our leadership of Tashu Kamawara and the Center for Bhutan and GNH Studies. Our seminar next week on Friday at 8 a.m., note the morning session, not afternoon, is Dr. Richard Davidson, who, like Professor Brewer, is a leading scientist of the mind and a friend and confidant of the Dalai Lama. So please do register for this and following seminars on CBS Facebook or website or by Instagram. So once again, our thanks to Dr. Brewer for your high-level discussion today. If you have time, please stay on, and may I now ask if Tashu Kamawara can take over the moderation from now.
Thank you, Dr. Chencho. I know that you have a very not only important but certain grave engagement, and that is why he has to leave, not for any other ordinary business, but perhaps something to do with the patients. I'm very happy that you could find the time to introduce Dr. Brewer. And I felt that our collective encounter with Dr. Brewer was has been not something like a meeting with the professor from Brown University, but distinctly had the feeling that we were listening to an arahant from the age of wisdom, and your own delivery today, very calm and very soothing, was extremely, at least to me, it was very, very healing and very cooling. And if I may use a metaphor, it was a bit like feeling of being near a cool flowing stream in a very even a more or cooler forest. So that was the effect of your generous sharing of knowledge. And if I may also stray a little bit, your own auspicious presence today amongst us, about 100, I think 44 here and many more in Facebook, was somewhat similar to sitting in front of a tanka with a red background and with central figure and butter lamp on either side. So we anyway, all these are by way of saying how rewarding experience for all of us has been to be introduced to the great ideas you have researched. And now I like, if you, I don't know, we will respect your time if you have to withdraw now, or you would like to entertain one or two questions.
I would be happy to take a few more questions, and then thank you for the kind words. I certainly have a long way to go on my own journey, but I appreciate the kind words.
So, so who would like to ask and take the precious time we have left, because I do not see any questions in the chat. So would you anybody directly request your doubts, your questions to be clarified by Dr. Brewer, please?
Yes, I would like to ask a question.
La Sola.
My name is, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Please go ahead. Please, we can hear you.
Yes, I wanted to ask Professor on the relationship between anxiety and addiction. Mm-hmm. And does anxiety induce states in which people want to numb themselves out, and would that lead to a vicious cycle which may be very hard to break instead of just anxiety? Or
yes, it's a very good question. Thank you for asking it. I find, and I don't remember the exact numbers, but there's a very high comorbidity between anxiety and addiction. So a lot of people that have anxiety have addictions. A lot of people with addictions have anxiety. I've seen in my own clinic that it's often anxiety that drives somebody to have an addiction. I think like you're talking about. I'm thinking, and I wrote about one of my patients in my book who had anxiety, and that unpleasant feeling of anxiety was driving him to drink alcohol. And he would drink way too much, which would actually make him, he could numb himself out from the feelings of anxiety for a little while, but then it would feed back and make him more anxious because it was causing other problems in his life. I also have a relatively young patient who she struggled with alcohol and anxiety, and the alcohol would actually, the feeling of being hungover was similar to the feelings of anxiety. And so the hangover would actually trigger anxiety in her. And then that anxiety, so starting with the drinking, she would get anxious, and then anxiety would then drive her to drink as well. So I've seen a lot where the two are very much intertwined, where anxiety can cause addiction, and addiction can feed back to anxiety.
Sorry, and the second part on how does one address that, because it's a sort of a vicious cycle, and how does one break that?
Yes, so the main approach that I've talked about, I've used it for anxiety, and I've also used it for addiction. So just using the example of the patient that I talked about, he was actually referred to me to help him with his drinking. And so what I had him do was start asking, start mapping out his habit loops around drinking. And he hadn't realized this before, but it was actually anxiety that was triggering him to drink. And that he wasn't actually, when he paid attention to the results of the drinking, that he was realizing that the drinking wasn't fixing the anxiety and it was actually making him feel worse. So anybody that has anxiety and an addiction, they can focus on the element of mapping out those habit loops around the addiction, around the anxiety, around both. And then they can start to take the second step where they can ask themselves, what am I getting from this? Which helps update the reward value in their brain. This gentleman, his alcohol wasn't helping him with his anxiety. When people stress eat and they realize it doesn't help them with their anxiety, they start to become disenchanted, less excited to do that behavior again. And that provides the foundation for helping them start to break free from the addiction and also helping them break free from the anxiety. This is where the third step comes in, where they can bring in practices around curiosity, for example, when they have a craving, and they can get curious about the feelings rather than before they actually start drinking. So the same process can be used for both, because the same treatment process can be used for both because the underlying process is the same, is shared between both of them as well. Does that make sense?
Thank you, Chandra, for that really pervasively important questions about anxiety and Professor Brewer for bringing the case of drinks and anxiety circle. Very important phenomena in our country. As an excuse to defend against low temperature in winter, there is a fair amount of drinking going on in this country, and sparking problems. Anyway, I think Rinchen wants to raise a question. Please ask direct questions. No need to explain or comment. Please ask direct questions. We have precious little time. Rinchen, please.
Thank you, Doctor. Can you hear me, sir? Am I audible to you, sir?
Yes.
Yes, we can all hear you.
Okay, otherwise I would have bowed down to you, sir. A very good example, sir. Sir, my question here is the anxiety, as I believe that every individual during their aging process with responsibility, the anxiety and stress grows with them equally in all the people. And with that, the people who are into alcohol using disorder or polysubstance use disorder, they are into further anxiety. So is there any module like therapy that we can help them within 3 months of time? Within 3 months, can we help them overcome the anxiety? That's my question. Thank you.
That's a good question. The studies that we have done with our app-based mindfulness training for anxiety, we've looked at 2 months, we've looked at 3 months, and we found in people with generalized anxiety disorder, so very severe anxiety, within 2 months, we can get a 67% reduction in anxiety. And so here, I would say it is possible to get very big reductions in anxiety relatively quickly. It comes down to helping somebody really map out their mind, really pay attention to these habit loops, and start to develop their capacities to be curious and kind. So, and that's the 3-step process I laid out in my book, and also that we have in the app. I know that it can be challenging to get some of these things, but the good news is that it is possible.
Thank you, Rinchen, for deepening the question and getting even more clarifying practical advice from Dr. Brewer. I can see that the position of the sun in Dr. Brewer's room is changing, and I think it is going to govern our routine even more now. But he has agreed few questions, so we have gone through two. So maybe to respect his time, two more questions. We will. Anybody wish to take this precious opportunity? Please ask directly. Anybody, please. Sabina, would you like to?
Yes, thank you so much. I just wondered if you had finished explaining your anxiety exercise. And if you didn't, I wanted to give a little space to finish that practice.
Thank you. Yes, I think there are a number of different practices that people can bring in, but I'll give another example, for example, of fostering curiosity. So we had talked a little bit about, when there's uncertainty and we start to go into the oh no, we can start to move, instead of oh no, where we're moving into panic, we can move into the oh of our growth zone. And one way that I find is helpful to do that is to bring our awareness to our eyes, because often when we're frustrated or we're anxious, our eyes tend to be a little more narrowed and closed down. And when we're curious, our eyes tend to be open. Oh, what's this? We're taking in new information. And so I find it's helpful to just open our eyes really wide as a way to help trigger curiosity, because our bodies lay down this what's called somatic memory, where they associate certain body feelings and positions, for example, with our eyes being really wide open, with certain emotions, such as curiosity. So here, one simple curiosity practice is, if we're feeling anxious, to open our eyes really wide. Oh, what does this feel like in my body right now? And even ask, where do I feel it in my body? To really awaken that curiosity, keeping our eyes really wide open. Oh, where is this in my body? So there's one pragmatic tool that can be used to awaken our curiosity.
Two questions have come in, and probably I will it's been a very beautiful afternoon for us here, and maybe it is morning for you.
It is.
The same sun shining on all of us.
Yes.
Two questions have come, and that will be the probably the last shaft of light shining on all of us. Gile Nurbu has asked a question about the relationship he wants you to clarify between sensation and addiction. I think he probably means pleasant sensation, which ties us to addiction. So that is his question. Second one is from Nita, and Nita has asked a broader question, and that is that the mental health affliction of the people in general are somewhat sidelined or underplayed by society, government, and everybody else, I suppose. And that makes the person who is afflicted more difficult to cope. More difficult to cope because it is a hidden pain he or she is carrying, and she wants your thoughts on how this private suffering can be ameliorated. Thank you.
Yes. So with the first question around the feelings, the sensations related to addiction, there's a difference between the feeling of, for example, the feeling of joy and the feeling of excitement. And with excitement, there's a restless quality, and it tends to feel more closed down and contracted, because excitement tends to come along with, oh, I'm about to do something, or something exciting is happening. Whereas joy feels more open and expanded. And in the same way, the feelings of addiction are often driven by that restless quality. Cravings tend to feel closed. They tend to feel restless. They drive us to do certain things. And even the, if somebody is intoxicated, well, it's hard to pay attention to the feelings, but it can feel pleasant when they're intoxicated. But afterwards, when they're craving more of that substance, that restless quality comes in. This is very different than the pleasant sensations that feel more open and expanded when somebody's feeling joy, or when somebody's feeling kindness, or when somebody is practicing gratitude, for example. And so those, the closed versus open quality of experience can be a really helpful way to differentiate when there's something related to an addiction, because addiction means driving, more of it, versus something that is non-addictive. So joy is not addictive, even though it feels good, it feels different. That open quality isn't driving us to do more of it. From a restless quality, we practice things that lead to joy just because they feel good. Just, for example, like kindness. Kindness feels good, but we don't get addicted to kindness. It just feels good itself, and it feels different than an addiction. So hopefully that answers the first question. And with regard to stigma, or mental health being often not talked about, I think this is true across the world. And I think there's some progress being made toward helping people see that they're not just physical beings, that the mind is just as important as the body. And if we can take any precedent or learn from what we've seen, at least in the West, and this, I don't know if this is the case everywhere, but people focused on physical activity decades ago, where they started learning, oh, it's important to exercise, where we didn't really focus on that as much. And then now we're learning that is important to take care of our minds as it is to take care of our bodies. So my hope is that there will be more and more public health teachings and campaigns to help people see that mental health is just as important as physical health. And it will be seen equally, where people don't have to be ashamed or afraid to talk about when they're, that they have anxiety, for example, that it is a normal thing, that we all have anxiety, and that it's actually more harmful to not talk about it and to stigmatize it, and to not be able to give people the support that they need than to actually do it. So my hope is that over time, this will change, but it can take some time, and change happens slowly for a lot of things.
So I think it's been, as the remark on teachings summed up, beautiful at the beginning, beautiful at the middle, and beautiful at the end. And I think your last two answers were very beautiful to conclude this discussion. And we like to offer our heartfelt gratitude to you. I am sure the audience has felt in this kind of thing. I think the message and messenger is same. If the messenger, without even speaking, cannot convey the message. I think something is not completely reconciled. But here you can see, I think Dr. Brewer as himself a practitioner, every word, every moment, every moment of being shows some confirmation. So this itself is a very big message that you can feel a professor also as a arahant in a way, and you can see this in his way of being. And so we thank you for your presence amongst us, and we would like now that you are specializing so much in a practical with anxiety, I think here also you will find many people wishing to benefit from your work. So with this, may I thank you, also thank Sabina, Professor Sabina, for bringing us in touch with you. And now the future path is clearer, and we look forward to receiving further enlightening encounters with you in a bigger way. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.